have an active shooter. We have an active shooter inside the warehouse.
Welcome to Active Shooter, a podcast that covers the whys, the hows, and the aftermath of active shooter and mass casualty events.
They have an active shooter in the building. A second call says they are being attacked.
I've been shot. 169 Sam Easy, we got shots fired. 4:15 AS, Route 291, sounded like an automatic firearm.
Active shooter, reports of an active shooter,
mass casualty incidents.
Thank you for listening.
You are listening to Active Shooter, a podcast that may contain adult themes, explicit language, and graphic depictions of violence. Portions of this show may be traumatic for those under 18. Listener discretion is advised.
The deadly school shooting in Michigan at Oxford High School, that's about an hour north of Detroit. 3 students killed, at least 8 others injured, including a teacher. An alleged lone gunman, a 15-year-old student, is in custody at this hour. Police say he was armed with a semi-automatic handgun. Multiple agencies responding to the call of an active shooter, ambulances in the driveway, the school principal getting on the PA with the code word for lockdown. The stories coming in at this hour of students barricading themselves inside, teachers putting paper up to cover the windows of classroom doors, then barricading the doors with tables. Some students climbing through a window, running for their lives across the snow. Others carried out on stretchers to the ambulances waiting outside. And of course, that sadly familiar storyline, students taken to a nearby location, this time a supermarket, to wait for their parents.
One of the most rare things we have seen in the coverage of 79 different shootings and mass murders is someone, other than the shooter, held accountable for the horrific actions that result in the unnecessary deaths of innocent citizens. The capture and ultimate prosecution of the shooter isn't even typical. The case we are presenting today is very different in that aspect. The Oxford High School shooter was provided the murder weapon as a gift from his parents a very short time before the shooting. They were aware of their son's mental health issues and had even met with school officials the morning of the shooting to discuss their child's disturbing behavior. The school officials wanted the student removed and given serious mental health treatment, but his parents refused, not believing their son was capable of such intense violence. Or at least, that was how they portrayed it later. However, as you already guessed, their son did commit a school shooting, a bloody and vicious homicide. After the news broke and the story went nationwide, they failed to turn themselves into the Oakland County Sheriff, having ostensibly gone to tie up loose ends, though they were later found in an empty office building located in Detroit. Eventually, all 3, parents and son, would be charged for the shooting deaths of 4 students and the injuries of 7 other survivors. The shocking details of November 30th, 2021, and the days leading up, left absolutely no doubt that parents and child alike should face a jury of their peers to answer for the execrable events of that day. In fact, there are so many points in time during this case where we were just a fraction away from preventing the entire event, which is as inexcusable as it is frustrating and extends beyond the shooter's parents. However, because his parents play such a large role in this case, we will assign them pseudonyms for clarity. We will call the shooter's father Mark and his mother Amy.
Active Shooter the podcast is a High Five Holly production, and I'm your host, JT. If you've listened to our prior episodes, you know that the Active Shooter podcast team has taken the no notoriety pledge, and we will not be sharing the real name of the shooters that we cover. We will be giving the shooters a pseudonym and refer to them by that name throughout the episode. This will help in clearing up any confusion in the story, while remaining true to our pledge in not naming the shooter by their actual name.
We will refer to today's shooter as Vince. Tuesday, November 30th, 2021 was a cold morning, not unlike most in a small, tight-knit community of Oxford, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit. The day probably seemed normal to most of the students, who were in that long, short stretch between the Thanksgiving and Christmas breaks. It wasn't a normal day, and really, no day after that will be normal for the victim's family, friends, and loved ones. It will never be a typical Tuesday for so many traumatized students who always knew school shootings could happen, but were stunned that it happened to them. That Tuesday morning, Vince brought his brand new 9mm Sig Sauer SP 2022 semi-automatic handgun to school with him. He had firm plans for its intended use, and no one was going to stop him. The 15-year-old sophomore began his day at Oxford High School, located at 745 North Oxford Road, and was in math class, completing a Chapter 5 test review at about 9 a.m. When class was over, Vince moved on to the next period. Nearly an hour later, Vince was called to the counselor's office to meet with school staff regarding a drawing and note that his teacher found on Vince's Chapter 5 test review worksheet. His teacher found the note to be extremely concerning, enough so that she brought it to the attention of the higher-ups. Vince left his backpack in class when he went to the meeting with the school counselor. When he arrived, the counselor asked whether Vince wanted his dad or mom to be called in, and he said his mom. Before his parents arrived, the counselor talked with Vince, and the drawing note was discussed. It depicted a drawing of a handgun with a bullet next to it. There were words on the bullet that read, quote, "Blood everywhere." Next to the gun and bullet was a drawing of a person who was bleeding with a laughing emoji next to it. Other phrases on the drawing included the following, quote, "The thoughts won't stop, help me. My life is useless. And the world is dead." The teacher thought enough to take a photo to share with school officials. No one thought to ask Vince where his backpack was.
That email was sent to me at 8:30. I saw it at 8:50.
Okay. And anything else occur after that?
Yes. Around the same time, the student had switched classes and was in his math class. That was when there was drawings done on his math assignment.
When was the first time that you were alerted to this math assignment?
Our dean of students came to my office around 9 a.m. To let me know that he had received a picture. Actually, had been shown a picture of a math assignment.
And did you see it at that time?
I had not seen the assignment at that time.
Okay. What, if anything, did you do next?
I went to the classroom to get him out of the classroom to have a meeting with him.
And when you greeted him, how would you describe his demeanor?
I didn't see much of a demeanor at the time. He was sitting in the front row of the classroom. So I just said, "Hey, we need to talk."
Okay. And what did you do after that?
I was standing with him. He stood up and followed me out of the class. I had grabbed the math assignment off his desk.
Okay. And you took him back to your office?
Back to my office, where the dean of students was waiting.
All right. And tell the court what happened in that meeting.
We had a conversation regarding initially the email that I had received about the video. So I had a conversation about the video to ask what it was. because the email was not overly descriptive as to what it was. And that's when he told me that it was of a video game. I never saw the video, so I had a description of it being a video game per the student and not an actual event per the teacher who had referred it.
Okay, so at the time that you brought the student into the room and had the meeting with him, you knew about the email and you had heard about this math assignment.
Correct.
And you had it in your hand.
Correct.
What was the purpose of bringing him into the office? Was it a violation of a school code? What was your role and why did you meet with him?
At the time, I did not know whether there was a violation of a school code or not based on having not observed the drawing at the time. I did have concern about the student because it was a couple of messages in a couple of days, and the purpose of the meeting was to find out what our next steps would be.
And when you said you had concern, what was your concern?
My concern was that I wanted to make sure he was okay.
Okay. So what happened after he sat down? What did you tell him he was there for?
That we had to discuss an email I had received, and also we had to discuss his math assignment.
Okay. And how did that go?
At first, he was very similar to how he had been the previous day, compliant and understanding. With the email, he regarded it as a video game, stated that he had an interest in designing video games after high school. Then I put the math assignment in between the two of us. He sat across from me at my desk, and I said, I would like to go over some of this. He said that it was a video game drawing that he had done in relation to the pictures that were on the assignment.
At that time, there were two versions of that math assignment.
Correct.
Okay. Which version did you have?
I had the hard copy version, which had been doctored.
Okay. And that's exhibit...
Had been doctored?
Had.
Yeah, I'm going to show it, Your Honor. That's exhibit 78. Mr. Hopkins, is this what you saw at that time of the meeting?
Yes.
Okay. And you asked him about this exhibit 78?
I did.
And what was his answer?
His answer was initially that it was a drawing of a video game he wanted to design. I then asked him to explain some of the words that had been written on the drawing.
Like what?
One that I could read was, "My life is useless." And so I wanted to ask, what does this mean? This does not sound like a video game.
Okay. And what did he say?
His demeanor then changed. He became sad.
And when you say he became sad, what did that look like? Why do you think he was sad? He started pausing more in his speech. He then described some things that had happened recently in his life. What were those things?
He talked about how a family dog had died. He talked about that he had lost a grandparent, that COVID had been incredibly difficult for him, that being out of school the previous year had been difficult for those virtual days. He talked about a friend who had left, that wasn't able to attend school anymore, had moved. And he talked about an argument about grades a previous night with parents.
With what?
With his parents.
Okay. What did you do next?
At that point, I determined that there was enough suicidal ideation based on his sadness and based on some of the words he had written on there that I called Mom.
He said the drawings were just a part of a video game he was designing, and he was ushered to the office to wait for his parents' arrival. Meanwhile, the school emailed a picture of Vince's math worksheet to his mom and called her, saying they were worried that Vince was having suicidal thoughts, and they wanted her to come into the school. His mom, Amy, told the counselor that she was at work and couldn't leave. This statement would later prove to be false, as testimony from her boss stated that she certainly could have left. Amy said she would try and reach her husband Mark. However, both ended up coming to the school together. The school counselor told Vince's parents that it was imperative that their son speak with a mental health professional immediately. As in, that very day. Mark and Amy said that was impossible. They each needed to get back to work. They had to earn a living, after all. School staff informed the couple that Vince needed to be enrolled into counseling within 48 hours, or else Child Protective Services, or CPS, would be called. What makes this entire exchange so much more disconcerting is that Mark and Amy knew that only a week earlier they had purchased a handgun for Vince. It was an early Christmas present, bought on Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving, when retailers offer massive discounts for the upcoming holiday season. They had clear and distressing evidence that their son was not all right, and the response seems to be anything but sound or rational. Amy later testified in court that not only could she not leave work early the day of the shooting, but she wouldn't be allowed to have several days off to watch over Vince. Mark, too, insisted he needed to work and couldn't take the time off. Perhaps they needed the money, but the time off. Mark was a DoorDash driver. He could work literally any hours he chose. When Amy's boss testified later in court, he claimed that he would have given her the time off she needed, no question. 2 additional employees from Amy's place of employment also testified that their boss was very understanding when it came to time off and was always flexible about working with them, especially in emergencies. It truly doesn't appear that they couldn't take the time off. It seems that they just wouldn't. Because Vince didn't have any disciplinary issues at school, he was allowed to return to class. He retrieved his backpack, though whether he collected it from class himself or it was given to him by a teacher isn't precisely clear. Either way, the backpack was never searched, and it held a firearm, and it was given back to a student that only hours before wrote disturbing ramblings about blood and death. At 12:50 p.m., Vince entered one of the school's bathrooms with his bag and walked back out after only 1 minute, which was later seen on surveillance footage. What was missing was the backpack. He didn't need it now that the gun was out in the open and being used to its true purpose. The shooting took place in between class periods, meaning the hallways were filled with hundreds of students rushing from one class to the other. Petrified students began running anywhere and everywhere, ducking for cover.
I just heard 2 bangs, and then I saw my teacher run into the room, lock down, and I was like, okay, this is a shooter.
Vince shot through doors and anywhere that there might be someone to shoot at. Witnesses later described Vince as deliberate and methodical as he paced down the hallway, shooting randomly into classrooms and directly at anyone who stepped in his way. Initially, students believed that the noise was just lockers slamming shut, but it didn't take long for the realization to hit them. This wasn't some offhand noise. These were gunshots, and they were being attacked. At 1:22 p.m., Vince's mom texted him saying, quote, "Don't do it." His dad called the police at 1:37 p.m. and reported a missing gun and stated that his son might be the shooter.
911, what's the location of your emergency? Okay, I'm not really sure. I'm at my house. There's an active shooter situation going on at the high school. My son goes to high school. I have a missing gun at my house. I need an officer to come to my house right away, please. Okay, I'm not going to be able to send anybody to your house right now. So they're on the active shooter situation right now. I understand that. There's a missing gun there. I have a missing gun, and my son was at the school, and we had to go meet with the counselor this morning because something that he wrote on a test paper, and then I was in down, and I saw a whole bunch of cops going somewhere, and I made sure that I wanted to get to the high school, so I was going to high school, and then someone told me that there was an active shooter, and then I raced home just to find out. Okay, and I see my son took the gun. I don't know if it's him. I don't know what's going on. I'm really freaking out. My son's making it. Alright, sir, I'm going to put you on hold for just 1 second, okay? I have to talk to Chris Wood. Come in and see if I can do anything for you, okay? Or Chris Huddle. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Alright, I'm going to get your name and phone number, and I'm going to have my lieutenant that's out there dealing with the situation. He's going to contact you, okay? What's your first name? My first name. Is your last name? Okay, do you know what your son was wearing when he left the house this morning? He had on a pair of sweatpants and like a gray shirt. A gray white sweatshirt. Okay. Alright. Alright, somebody's going to give you a call, okay? I can't give you a time frame because they're right in the middle of all of this. So I can't give you a time frame, but we're going to give you a call as soon as possible, okay? Okay. Alright, thank you.
The firearm was stored in an unlocked drawer in the house, and, being a gift for Vince, he obviously had full knowledge of where it was kept. The response from the staff and students was astonishing. Everyone acted swiftly and with purpose, putting boot locks into the doors and sending out alerts. The intercom system came alive with a report of an active shooter, and everyone took every great action covering windows and barricading doors.
Student John Edwards describing the chaos to our affiliate WXYZ.
Over the PA, we hear our principal, Mr. Wolf, shouting, Alice lockdown, Alice lockdown. And then we heard the gunshots in the class. And so we locked down, turned the lights off. Our teacher got paper, taped over the window on the door, and got his 2 big tables and barricaded the door. I was just scared. I was praying for, my safety, my friend's safety, everyone's safety.
The intercom system came alive with the report of an active shooter, and everyone took even greater action, covering windows and barricading doors. A student from the AP statistics class began handing out calculators to students to throw at the shooter while in other classrooms. Students were piling desks in front of the door to prevent the shooter from getting into their respective classrooms. Any place that could act as some sort of shelter, no matter how crude, became a shield. So many kids were walking to and from class and were exposed and vulnerable. Some hid inside bathrooms, and other students were running from the shooting, racing away so fast that they ran right out of their shoes. Some kids were hysterically crying and were so worked up that they got physically sick, while others were on their phones crying and calling family members. The police response was just as immediate. They arrived within only 1 minute of the initial 911 calls. The police happened to encounter Vince coming down a hallway, and he instantly surrendered, handing over the gun to police. Vince was taken into custody within about 2 to 3 minutes of the police arriving. Vince had 7 rounds of ammunition loaded into his weapon, and 2 15-round magazines on his person when taken into custody. He gave himself up, without an ounce of fight, and in an instant went from looking like a completely terrifying monster to an unwell, sullen teenager. From start to finish, the whole shooting lasted approximately 5 minutes and occurred on the south end of the high school, which had immediately gone into lockdown at the first announcement or hint of an active shooting. Over 100 officers responded from 24 various nearby agencies. Many students were taken to a nearby Meijer grocery store to assemble, so staff could attempt to gain some control over the situation. A woman that lived next door to the school allowed several students to take shelter inside her home until things were clear. In total, 6 students and 1 teacher were injured. The injured were rushed to several nearby hospitals, including McLaren Lapeer, McLaren Oakland, and St. Joseph Mercy Oakland. A 47-year-old teacher was injured from a gunshot wound to the left shoulder. It was later reported to be a graze wound. 2 female students and 1 male were in critical care after sustaining gunshot wounds. One of the 2 females was shot in the neck and chest, and she was placed on a ventilator. The boy, a 14-year-old, was shot in the head and jaw and was listed as being in serious condition. A 17-year-old female and male and a 15-year-old male were listed as in stable condition, while 17-year-old Justin Schilling arrived at the hospital with a gunshot wound to the head. The young teenager died the following morning at 10 a.m., though he remained on life support until Friday, so his organs could be donated in a final giving act of one life, taken out of hate and anger, saving another out of compassion, love, and the ultimate gift of a living organ. A number of students suffered minor scrapes, cuts, and bruises as they tried to run from the school. There are few specifics about what happened inside the school at the time of the shooting, though more details will likely come out when, or if, there is a trial. Madison Baldwin, 17 years old, and 14-year-old Hannah St. Juliana were both pronounced dead at the scene, while 16-year-old Tate Meyer was rushed to the hospital by a deputy's patrol cruiser, which arrived before the first ambulance. Unfortunately, he passed away on the trip to the hospital. In total, 30 bullets were fired. The day before the shooting, Vince got into trouble for searching for ammunition on his cell phone. He was caught by school officials who contacted Mark and Amy by phone and email to notify them of the situation, but neither parent ever returned the call. After Amy listened to the message, she didn't call the school back as you'd imagine she would. Instead, Amy texted her son saying, quote,
"Did you show them a picture of your gun?"
And,
LOL, I'm not gonna get mad at you. You have to learn not to get caught.
That same day at school, other students noticed Vince with shell casings and live rounds of ammunition. During the police investigation, a police dog alerted on Vince's backpack in the bathroom, where he drew his weapon, intent for mass destruction. On an interesting but perhaps unrelated side note is that on the morning of the shooting, Vince's mom told the barn owner where she stored her horses that she had a bad day, dealing with her son and the text of a photo of a math worksheet. Kira, the barn owner, suggested that Amy should bring Vince to the barn for some horse therapy, to which Amy replied that she would have to bring him because Vince couldn't be left home alone to his own devices. At 2:36 p.m., Amy texted Kira that she wouldn't be at the barn today. What was more alarming was that Amy requested that Kira sell all of her horses immediately. 17-year-old Madison Baldwin was born on May 17, 2014. A senior, set to graduate that year. She had already been accepted to several colleges, some with a full scholarship. The eldest of her siblings, Madison, had a half-brother and 2 sisters, and by all appearances was loved by everyone. She was described as kind and patient, and loved creative outlets including writing, drawing, and reading. A GoFundMe was established for the family after her death, and has raised just under $110,000. Madison will be deeply missed forever. Tate Meyer was 16 years old and was born in Rochester, Michigan, on January 1st, 2005. A junior in high school, Tate loved hanging out with his friends and playing all types of sports. He wrestled and played football, and those that knew him considered Tate a leader, both on and off the field. Tate absolutely loved Christmas and the holiday season, but he especially loved decorating the tree and baking holiday cookies. He was loyal to friends and family and left a positive impression anywhere he went. Tate is survived by 2 brothers, parents, and dog Cash. He will never be forgotten. Hannah St. Juliana was 14 years old when she was taken from this earth. Born on January 29, 2007, Hannah was best friends with her sister, who was 2 years older. The sisters shared everything from clothes to friends and anything in between. In addition, Hannah had a little brother, and they all spoke Japanese as their mom grew up in Japan. The high school freshman loved to laugh and had a bright personality that attracted others. Hannah was athletic and played basketball and volleyball, which she had done since middle school. The bright young woman made her basketball debut the night before the shooting. Hannah will be missed by all, but her spirit lives on with each of them. 17-year-old Justin Schilling was born on April 18, 2004, in Macomb, Michigan. An avid student that achieved excellent grades and served on student council in middle school, Justin was a bit of an overachiever in academics, but he also loved sports and played baseball in elementary and middle school. Justin was a mentor to freshman students entering high school, in addition to bowling and golfing. He was a busy kid, but Justin loved it like that. Above all, he was happiest going to a University of Michigan football game or spending time with family. He loved music, all types, and owned an aquarium full of fish. Justin's greatest dream was to own a GT Mustang and flip houses with his friends. Justin will be missed by so many that loved and cared for him. Vince was 15 years old when he committed the shooting. His mother worked for a busy real estate office, and Dad was a DoorDash driver. The family lived in a small pale green house on a quiet street, and Amy owned 2 horses, and they were her world. She spent about 304 days per year at the barn, and that was for about 3 hours total each visit. Vince went with her a few times, but never wanted to go back. In 2014 and 2015, Mark and Amy left Vince at home alone without a phone, so they could go out partying. A lot. The neighbor was so concerned that they eventually called CPS, though it's unknown if any action was ever taken. Sometimes, Vince would go and knock on their door to see if the neighbor could help track his mother down. The family did struggle a lot, mostly with money. Just for the horses, Billy and Shorty, alone, Amy spent about $800 per month for board, and that didn't include the other exorbitant costs associated with owning a horse. She was just obsessed with them, and seemed more dedicated to the horses than her own son, whom she rarely talked about to others, other than to say that her son really didn't have any friends, other than one who moved away before the shooting. She called her son a weirdo, or called him weird, saying he spent a ton of time online. Besides his friend moving away, the family dog Tank passed away, and it all took a toll on Vince. He wrote almost compulsively in his journal, a book that contained many disturbed musings and writings, including notes about the shooting and a plan to surrender to the police so that he could witness the pain he caused. Vince seemed enamored with pain and suffering, violence and weapons, and he even discussed with a classmate a plan he had to stalk, rape, torture, and kill another classmate. It seems, by many accounts, that Vince was suffering from some sort of mental illness, though nothing had been diagnosed, and he was eventually deemed fit to stand trial. On one occasion, he was home alone and started to text his mom to say that he was hallucinating a demon throwing bowls around the house. When Amy didn't respond quickly enough, Vince sent more text messages saying, quote, "Can you at least text back?" There were multiple messages saying that there were ghosts, demons, and other people living in the house when they weren't home. In May of 2021, Vince recorded himself killing and torturing animals. We all know what that could lead to. In one of those videos, he killed and tortured a bird, and then kept the bird's head in a jar in his bedroom, where it seems his parents very clearly could have seen it. But it doesn't seem that any questions were asked. In addition to the torture videos, Vince made videos about shooting up the school and how he was upset with his life, so badly that he stopped doing homework and wrote in his journal about his shock that his parents hadn't noticed. In early 2021, Vince begged his folks to purchase him a 9mm handgun and take him to the shooting range. It's not necessarily atypical of most teenage boys, but then, in August of 2021, Vince took a selfie holding a .22 handgun that belonged to his father and sent it to a classmate saying that it was time to shoot up the school. The text was immediately followed up with, quote, "JK, JK, JK. But clearly, the sick joke was no joke at all. All signs point to Vince having unlimited and open access to his parents' weapons. In October of 2021, the month before the shooting, Vince became inexplicably sad and depressed after his one and only friend moved away. It was devastating for Vince. On November 26, 2021, 4 days before the shooting, Vince and his dad went to a local gun collector and purchased a new gun for Vince. Mark even told the salesperson that the gun was for Vince, but it doesn't seem any other questions were asked. Vince ended up posting a photo on social media with himself holding the firearm. On November 27th, Vince asked his mother if she would take him to the local gun range to practice shooting. She did. It was one of the many times that Vince saw and was aware of where the gun was stored. Everything came to a head after a teacher noticed Vince searching for videos that showed graphic shootings and reported it to the counselor. Attorneys for Mark and Amy claimed that they were unaware that their son was torturing animals, which is extremely improbable. Both Mark and Amy's families live in Florida, and the connection, or reason for moving to Michigan, isn't clear. Students report that Vince was quiet and never talked to people, though his brother says he was an average kid that loved playing Minecraft and wanted to be an archaeologist. The reality is, he is a disturbed young man who should never have had access to guns in the first place. When Vince's phone was examined after the shooting, 2 videos were located and both were recorded the night before. One video talks about shooting and killing students at Oxford the next day. Vince's dad, Mark, recently had some legal trouble in Florida for falling behind on some child support payments for a child from a past relationship. Mark worked as an independent contractor for a company that provided GPS tracking to the transportation industry from February to July of 2021. The reason for his termination is unknown, though none of it appears to have any contributing factors to Vince's eventual actions. Vince was initially lodged at the juvenile detention center, called Children's Village, and placed on suicide watch, which is standard operating procedure. Vince's home was searched and his cell phone was seized. Vince refused to talk to or cooperate with police, but they dug deep into the investigation just the same. On December 1st, 2021, the day after the shooting, Vince was charged as an adult and transferred to the Oakland County Jail. His defense attorney filed a notice with the state, announcing their decision to present an insanity defense, saying that Vince was suffering from hallucinations. He is held in a cell made of concrete, with a glass front door, a window, a single bed, and a toilet. He is allowed to make phone calls and watch TV, as well as use a tablet that has access to books, movies, games, and even messaging capabilities. After Vince's arrest, his parents immediately started making plans. They purchased 4 cell phones and started selling the horses. They checked into a hotel on the night of the shooting, and the next day they checked into a different one. They withdrew $3,000 from an ATM, which left the account with only 99 cents. The bank account belonged to Vince. Then they went and withdrew another $2,000 in cash and checked out of the hotel, leaving one of their cars in the parking lot, parked in a manner that concealed the license plates. By all appearances, they were in hiding, but their defense attorneys say that isn't so. They weren't running. They were hiding for their own protection. The couple was scheduled to appear in court for their arraignment on Friday, December 3rd, 2021, but neither appeared. The United States Marshals released wanted posters for the pair, but it wasn't long before they were found hiding in the basement of an art studio, and they exited to smoke cigarettes. They texted the owner of the building when they needed some necessities such as socks and bedding. A renter of a nearby business saw a car parked in the back of the building, and, thinking it was strange, went to investigate. The person immediately recognized the couple from the massive news coverage about the shooting, and they reported it to the police.
The parents of the shooter that are running away, they're here. There was a Kia that looked like their car, and I walked around and checked the license plate, and it's their car, and the woman is here.
When police arrived, they located the distressed couple holding Social Security cards, over a dozen credit cards and gift cards, multiple cell phones, and $6,600 in cash. Mark and Amy were each charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, which is incredibly rare, but seemingly incredibly warranted in this instance. They are each slated to head to trial in January of 2023. The justice system levied 24 charges against Vince, including 1 count of terrorism causing death, 4 counts of first-degree murder, 7 counts of assault with intent to commit murder, and 12 counts of possession of a firearm in the commission of a felony. On October 24, 2022, Vince pleaded guilty as charged to all counts.
Sir, has anyone promised anything or made threats that has not been stated on the record?
No, sir.
Is it your own choice to plead guilty?
Yes, sir.
Do you need any more time to talk to your attorneys about any of your rights?
No, sir.
And I will allow the prosecutor to conduct the voir dire. However, I will ask you, sir, did these offenses occur on or about November 30th, 2021 in Oakland County?
Yes, sir.
What city or township?
Oxford.
Thank you. People?
Thank you, Judge. Sir, on that date, November the 30th, 2021, in Oakland County, Michigan, did you bring a 9mm 6-hour handgun and 50 rounds of 9mm ammunition with you to the Oxford High School?
Yes, sir.
Did you keep the gun and ammunition in your backpack with you that day?
Yes.
Is it true that approximately 12:49 p.m. on that date you entered a boys' bathroom in the Oxford High School?
Yes.
Is it true that
I'm sorry, can you keep your voice up for me?
Yes, sir.
Is it true that while inside the boys' bathroom, in the stall of the bathroom, you removed the handgun from your backpack?
Yes.
Is it true that you ensured that the handgun was loaded?
Yes.
Is it true that you exited the bathroom approximately 12:51 p.m. on November the 30th, 2021?
Yes.
Is it true that when you exited the bathroom, you began shooting at students and staff members of the Oxford High School?
Yes.
It's considered a landmark case in that it's the first known school shooter to be charged with, and convicted of, terrorism on state charges according to Oakland County Prosecutor Karen McDonald, who should be celebrated for her refusal to use the defendant's name in open court. She referred to the shooter as the defendant throughout the proceedings. There is no sentencing date scheduled yet, but a review hearing is set for February, which is most likely when that date will be set, Students at Oxford have been attending classes in other buildings since January 10th of 2022. Dozens of therapy dogs and puppies were at the school welcoming students back. The school had been renovated with new paint, wall graphics, and ceiling tiles, and reporters and other media outlets were asked to stay away from the campus and respect the students' privacy. The night before the shooting, the shooter posted on Twitter, quote, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. See you tomorrow, Oxford." He may have brought this community and school to its knees, but their determined spirit to overcome and be even better makes them Oxford strong. We all have the unique ability to help prevent such a catastrophic event from happening, if we keep our eyes and ears open and never hesitate to report when something or someone just doesn't seem right. It is our sincerest wish that there will be no more active or mass shooting stories to tell. We pray that love will prevail over hate.
Too many have died. We should say to ourselves, not one more.
In the meantime, we urge our listeners to stay aware of your surroundings and keep in touch with your loved ones. If you see something, say something. You never know how many lives you'll be saving.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Active Shooter, the podcast. Remember, if you see something, say something. There's no telling how many lives you may be saving. A huge thank you to Darren Curtis, who composed some of the music used in this episode. Check him out at darrencurtismusic.com. DARRENCURTIS music.com.
Active shooter. Reports of an active shooter. Active shooter.
Active shooter mass casualty incidents.
Make sure to check us out on social media. We have a discussion group on Facebook. Just search for Active Shooter, the podcast discussion group. You can also find us on Instagram at Active the Podcast and Twitter at Podcast Active. For just $1 a month, you can get access to ad-free episodes, early release episodes when available, and a shout-out on the show. Just go to patreon.com/Active the Podcast. Thank you, and be safe.
I'm Edward October, and I'm here at the October Pod Ranch in the Great Smoky Mountains. Almost every night here, there's a ghost story party around the campfire. In my family, we believe that scary stories are best told around a roaring fire with a bottle of wine. That's why bold individualists everywhere choose October Pod for their retro horror thrills. Our stories are so good because they're told with such care, understated, moody, and, above all, chilling. Why don't you join us? For retro horror of impeccable taste, choose Octoberpod. Find us on YouTube or at octoberpodvhs.com. Octoberpod. Retro horror for bold individualists.